Christmas was supposed to be my sanctuary, my favorite time of the year, when the world softened around the edges and family felt like an unshakable refuge, filled with warmth, comfort, and endless love. A magical time when laughter bounced off the walls and everyone seemed to forget their troubles for just a little while. Growing up, the holidays weren't just a date on the calendar, they were the heartbeat of our family. My parents carefully decorating the house with twinkling lights that cast a golden glow over every corner. Olivia and I dancing around the living room to our favorite carols, while Mom baked cookies that filled the air with the sweet scent of cinnamon and vanilla, and Dad telling stories by the fireplace that made us all feel safe, connected, and unbreakably close. But as the years went by, those perfect scenes slowly started to crack, and this Christmas, the fractures became impossible to ignore. I'm Harper, a 25-year-old woman who had always believed in the power of family, in the idea that no matter what happened, blood ties meant you belonged, that you'd always be seen and heard by those who were supposed to love you most. But this year, everything changed, and my heart shattered when the truth became undeniable. I was not welcome, not at all. It started with a simple phone call that never came. When Olivia gathered everyone for the annual Christmas trip, an event we had never missed since I could remember, I waited anxiously, excited and hopeful, thinking this year might be different, that maybe we could finally mend the little cracks that had formed between us. But instead, silence. Days passed without a single message. No invitation, no, "Hey, Harper, we're planning something, want to join?" Nothing. I tried to brush it off, telling myself maybe they hadn't finalized the plans yet. Maybe they were just busy. But the doubt gnawed at me. Then the cruel reality hit when a cousin accidentally sent me a text meant for someone else, an innocent message that shattered my entire world. A detailed plan for a family trip to Aspen, filled with snow-capped mountains, cozy cabins, hot cocoa by the fire, and not a single mention of me. They had deliberately left me out. My chest tightened, and the air seemed to vanish from the room as the realization sunk in. I was erased from their picture-perfect holiday. I was excluded. Not for any reason I understood, not because I had done something wrong, but because I was deemed unwanted. Confusion and pain collided inside me in a storm so fierce I could barely breathe. Why would they do this? What had I done to deserve being cut off, ignored, like a ghost? I wrestled with a flood of emotions: hurt, betrayal, anger, and the sharp sting of abandonment. But the silence from them was deafening. I tried to reach out to Olivia, the sister who had once been my closest ally, the person I thought would stand by me no matter what. When I finally found the courage to ask her why I was excluded, she didn't hesitate to attack with words as cold as ice, saying, "Harper, you're always so selfish. We didn't want to deal with your drama this year." Selfish. Drama. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, twisting inside my chest until I was gasping for air. Me, selfish? Drama. I had spent the last year working 2 jobs, barely scraping by, sacrificing time and energy to survive, all while trying to keep some semblance of connection with my family, only to be labeled the villain in their story. The unfairness was staggering. My voice cracked as I tried to defend myself, to explain that my life hadn't been easy, that I was doing the best I could, but the words fell on deaf ears. Olivia had already made up her mind. Her accusations weren't about me. They were about control, about silencing the person who dared to be different, who wasn't part of their perfect picture. That night, after the painful conversation, I sat alone in my small apartment, the loneliness wrapping around me like a heavy blanket, my heart aching as memories of happier holidays flashed in my mind, family dinners filled with laughter, the excitement of unwrapping presents, the warmth of belonging, all now replaced by cold silence and rejection. The sting of exclusion burned deep, but beneath the hurt, a new feeling began to rise, a fierce resolve that took root in my soul. They thought they could push me out and call me selfish, but who was really selfish? Was it me, the one left standing outside, wanting nothing more than to be included? Or was it them, who shut the door and threw away a sister without a second thought? I refused to let their judgment define me. I refused to let their rejection break me. And so, even as tears slid down my cheeks that night, I promised myself this was not the end of my story. No, this was the beginning of a fight, a reckoning that would change everything. I knew deep down that this Christmas, filled with cold exclusion and cruel words, was the spark that would ignite a fire they would never see coming. A fire fueled by truth, justice, and the refusal to be silenced or ignored any longer. I sat there for hours, grappling with pain and rage, letting my emotions flow freely. The hurt, the anger, the disbelief, all mixing into a powerful cocktail that hardened into determination. I pictured the upcoming days, the ways I could stand up for myself, the strength I never knew I had stirring within me. I thought about what it meant to be truly family. Not just sharing blood, but sharing respect, love, and inclusion. Things my family had forgotten. I recalled the countless times I'd bent over backwards to be there for them, to forgive mistakes, to keep the peace, only to be repaid with silence and exclusion. The unfairness of it all fueled a fire inside me that grew hotter by the minute, pushing me to no longer accept the role of the victim. I thought about the hollow feeling of waking up on Christmas morning, knowing I wouldn't be surrounded by people who claimed to love me, but had chosen to leave me out, to erase me. The loneliness felt crushing, but with it came clarity, a realization that sometimes family isn't the people who include you when it's convenient, but the people who fight for you even when it's hard. And if my family refused to fight for me, then I would have to fight for myself. That night, as I wiped away my tears and stared out at the silent city skyline, I made a silent vow that I would reclaim my place, that I would show them who Harper really was. Not the selfish, dramatic person they accused me of being, but a strong, determined woman who wouldn't be pushed aside or silenced any longer. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that standing up to family could mean losing them forever. But I also knew that pretending to be someone I wasn't had cost me too much already. This Christmas, exclusion had lit a fire inside me that would blaze into a powerful storm of truth and justice. And as the cold winter wind blew through the streets outside, I felt something warm bloom inside, hope, strength, and the promise of a revenge that wasn't about cruelty, but about reclaiming my dignity and demanding the respect I deserved. This was my story, my fight, and I was ready to write the next chapter on my own terms. The cold December air bit at my skin as I pulled my coat tighter around me. The city lights flickering behind the familiar streets leading to my family's house, the very place that had felt like home for so long, yet now felt like a battleground. I stepped up to the front door of the house, where the Christmas Eve party was already in full swing, a gathering they had all assumed I would skip, that I would quietly accept my erasure and stay away, licking my wounds alone. But this year, things were different. I was done with hiding in the shadows, done with pretending their cruelty didn't sting as deeply as it did. I took a deep breath, steadying the storm of emotions inside me, and rang the doorbell. When Olivia opened it, her eyes narrowed in shock, the sneer curling her lips the moment she recognized me. "What are you doing here?" she spat, as if my presence was a contagion that threatened to ruin their perfect evening. But I didn't flinch. I met her gaze with a strength she hadn't seen before. "I'm here because I'm done being invisible," I said, my voice steady but fierce, laced with the fire of every hurt, every lonely Christmas I had endured, and every time they had whispered behind my back that I was selfish and dramatic. "You called me selfish for being left out? Funny, because excluding someone who loves you isn't exactly selfless." The words hung heavy in the air, thick with accusation and truth, and I could see the flicker of doubt in their eyes. That uncertainty that comes when the story you've told yourself unravels in front of you. The party went silent. The laughter and music faded into the background as every pair of eyes turned toward me. I could feel the weight of their stares, some filled with shock, others with thinly veiled disdain. But for the first time, I held the power. I wasn't the black sheep anymore. I was the voice that refused to be silenced, the storm that had finally arrived at their doorstep. Inside, my heart pounded with a mix of fear and exhilaration, but I stood my ground, knowing this moment was the beginning of something bigger, a breaking point, not just for me, but for all of us. Memories of years spent bending to their expectations flashed through my mind. The times I swallowed my pain to keep the peace, the moments I forced a smile while they whispered behind my back, the endless cycle of being the scapegoat for problems I never caused. But tonight, I was done with being their punching bag. As I stepped inside, the familiar smell of pine and cinnamon mixed with the cold air, a cruel reminder of the family I once belonged to, but that now felt more like a cage. I noticed the subtle shifts in the room, the hushed whispers, the sideways glances, and I let it wash over me like fuel. "You all think you know me," I continued, my voice steady and clear. "But you don't. You think excluding me will make the problems disappear, that if you ignore me long enough, I'll vanish like I never mattered. But I'm here to tell you, I do matter. I matter to myself, and that's all that counts." The room grew heavier with tension as Olivia's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Her usual confident sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. She tried to cut me off, but I held up a hand, silencing her. "No," I said firmly. "Tonight, I'm not your scapegoat. Tonight, I'm not the selfish one. I'm the one standing here with the courage you all lack, the courage to face the truth, to admit what you've done." My parents exchanged uncomfortable looks, their expressions tight with guilt and denial. Years of unspoken rules and toxic dynamics seemed to unravel with every word I spoke, as if the invisible threads holding our family's facade together were snapping one by one. I could see the cracks in their perfect little world, the fear creeping in as the story they told themselves began to crumble. For years, I had been the outcast, the one who didn't fit their mold, the black sheep who challenged the neat image of a perfect family. But now, I was no longer hiding in the background. I was stepping into the light, and the light exposed everything. The lies, the favoritism, the silent cruelty they had tried to mask with holiday cheer. My voice grew stronger, fueled by years of pain and resilience. "You think this is just about a Christmas trip? It's not. It's about control. It's about power. It's about how you've tried to keep me in a box, labeled me as the problem when I was only trying to love you on my own terms. I glanced around the room, locking eyes with cousins who once smiled at me warmly, but now avoided my gaze, as if ashamed of their complicity. The silence stretched out like a thick fog, but I wasn't afraid. The fear had transformed into a fierce determination. "I'm not asking for your approval anymore," I declared, voice ringing out like a bell in the stillness. "I'm here to reclaim my voice, my place, and my dignity. If you can't accept that, then maybe this family isn't what I thought it was." Olivia opened her mouth to retort, but the words died on her lips as the weight of my declaration settled over them all. I could see the storm brewing behind their eyes. Anger, confusion, maybe even regret. But I knew this was the moment when the balance of power shifted. I wasn't their invisible scapegoat anymore. I was the force they couldn't ignore. The air in the room felt charged, crackling with tension and unspoken truths. I stood tall, heart racing, knowing that this confrontation was only the first step in a longer journey. A journey to heal, to reclaim myself, and to demand the respect I deserved. As the party continued around us, I could see the cracks growing wider, the fragile illusion of a perfect family shattering before my eyes. And somewhere, deep inside me, beneath the anger and pain, a quiet hope began to bloom. A hope that maybe, just maybe, this breaking point would lead to something better, something real, something honest. But I was prepared for whatever came next, because this was my moment, my fight, and I was ready to take back everything they tried to steal from me. That night, the air in the house felt thick with an unusual tension, almost as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to break the fragile silence that had settled after my confrontation. The family, still reeling from my unexpected arrival and words, moved into the living room to begin their so-called traditional gift exchange, their chatter subdued and cautious now, eyes flicking to me with a mixture of wariness and disbelief. They left their phones, keys, and jackets carelessly scattered on the kitchen counter. A small opening, a careless mistake that I instantly recognized as my chance. Years of being dismissed, ignored, and excluded had built a quiet fire inside me, a slow-burning determination that was now roaring to life. Without a word, I slipped away from the room, my footsteps muted against the wooden floor as I made my way to the front door. My fingers trembled slightly as I wrapped them around the cold metal doorknob, heart pounding fiercely in my chest. This simple act was about to become my declaration of independence. Slowly, deliberately, I turned the lock from the inside with a sharp click that echoed through the quiet house like a gunshot. And for the first time, I held the power. I stepped back into the shadows, waiting to see the storm I had just unleashed. The moments that followed felt surreal. A thick silence, broken suddenly by the sharp realization that the door was locked. The family's panic was immediate. "Harper, unlock the door!" My dad's voice cracked through the stillness, sharp with fear and frustration. A stark contrast to the cold indifference they had shown me all year. I stood firm, meeting his desperate gaze without flinching. "You locked me out all year," I said, my voice steady and fierce. "Now, it's your turn to be locked out." The words struck the room like lightning, a thunderclap that shook the foundation of their perfect little world. I could see the shock ripple across their faces, twisting into anger and disbelief as the gravity of what I'd done sank in. Olivia's usual sneer dissolved into wide-eyed shock, her lips parting to protest. but no sound came out. "You can't be serious," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. But I was deadly serious. For years, I had been the outsider, the forgotten one, the scapegoat they tossed aside without a second thought. Now, the tables had turned. Their panic grew as they realized they were trapped, forced to face the cold, hard reality of exclusion in the very place where they had made me feel invisible for so long. My dad's voice wavered as he pleaded, "Harper, please, this isn't funny. Unlock the door." But the years of neglect and cruelty had carved a new strength inside me, and I refused to give them the easy way out. "This isn't a joke," I said softly. "It's a lesson. You wanted to exclude me. Now you're experiencing what that feels like." The house seemed to shrink around us, the air charged with tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Cousins who once smiled warmly at me now avoided my eyes, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The festive lights cast flickering shadows that danced across their faces, illuminating the cracks in their forced smiles and polite conversation. I stood tall, the fire inside me burning brighter with each passing second. This lockout was more than just a symbolic act. It was a declaration that I would no longer be sidelined, silenced, or dismissed. As they scrambled to find alternate exits, some peering nervously through windows, others pounding on the locked door and shouting for help, I felt a quiet satisfaction swell inside me. For once, I wasn't the one left outside in the cold, desperate for inclusion. I was the one inside, in control, holding the key to their freedom. The irony was sharp and bitter. The same hands that had pushed me away now shook with helplessness. The voices that called me selfish now begged for mercy. The room was alive with raw, unfiltered emotion, anger, frustration, fear, and a dawning sense of regret. The very traditions they clung to now felt hollow and fragile, crumbling under the weight of my rebellion. The evening stretched on, each minute heavier than the last, the family's desperation growing, with no resolution in sight. My mind raced through memories of Christmases past, the silences, the invisible wounds, the endless feeling of being unwanted, and I realized that tonight, those wounds were beginning to heal in a way I never expected. The lock I held was more than metal and wood. It was the symbol of my refusal to be invisible any longer. Olivia's voice finally cut through the tension, trembling but defiant. "You think this makes you strong? You're just cruel." I shook my head, sadness mingling with a fierce resolve. "No," I replied quietly. "I'm just done being weak." In that moment, I was no longer just a sister, locked out of family moments or forgotten on holidays. I was a woman reclaiming her voice, rewriting what family means, and demanding respect on my own terms. The night dragged on with heated arguments, frustrated pleas, and the undeniable truth settling over us all. Nothing would ever be the same again. I stood firm, unwavering, the locked door a physical and emotional barrier, but also a promise to myself that I would never again accept being pushed aside. As the clock ticked past midnight, the air shifted subtly, the fragile walls of silence cracking just enough to let something new in. They had been locked out, but I had found my way back to myself, and in that, I found a strength no exclusion could ever take away. This night was not just a lockout. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I held the key to my own destiny, and no one could ever hold me captive again. The aftermath of that night's lockout swept through our small town like wildfire, igniting conversations, judgments, and revelations that I never anticipated but knew were overdue. As the story unfolded in hushed whispers, in cafes, at work, and in neighborhood gatherings, it became clear that what I had done was no longer just a family matter. It had become a public reckoning. People I barely knew, and even some I thought I did, suddenly took sides, their voices rising in a chorus of approval or condemnation, each laced with their own biases and experiences. Some branded me cruel, cold-hearted, a vindictive sister who took family disagreements to an unacceptable extreme. Others heralded me as a beacon of strength, applauding my refusal to be marginalized or silenced any longer. But behind the headlines and opinions was the raw, unvarnished reality of what had truly transpired. A fracture laid bare, the deep wounds of exclusion and misunderstanding that had long gone unspoken within my family. The lockout was never about punishment. It was a desperate plea to be seen, to be heard, and to demand respect from those who had dismissed me for far too long. When the initial shock of that night began to fade, the ripples of tension in my family's waters only grew stronger. Apologies started to trickle in. Tentative texts, awkward phone calls, and in-person conversations weighted with regret and unease. Olivia's voice, once sharp and dismissive, softened as she admitted her mistakes, saying, "Harper, I didn't realize how much we hurt you. I was wrong to exclude you." Dad's messages were brief, but sincere, offering a hope that we could rebuild what had been broken. Yet, something fundamental had shifted within me. Forgiveness alone no longer felt sufficient. I had come to understand that true healing required more than just words of remorse. It demanded a transformation of the very dynamics that had allowed exclusion and toxicity to fester in the first place. I was no longer willing to settle for superficial apologies or to slip back into the old patterns that had caused so much pain. The toxic family dynamics that had governed our relationships like invisible chains had to be broken, not just for my sake, but for the well-being of everyone involved. This realization sparked a fierce determination in me to be the catalyst for change, to break the cycle of silence, judgment, and exclusion that had defined us. The conversations that followed were among the hardest I had ever faced. Sitting around the dinner table, faces flushed with emotion, we peeled back layers of resentment and misunderstanding, unearthing years of hurt that had been buried beneath forced smiles and holiday traditions. Anger flared alongside tears as we confronted uncomfortable truths, but within the chaos was a fragile hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild on a foundation of honesty and respect. I pushed for us to seek family counseling, a step met with resistance, but gradually accepted as the path toward real healing. Those sessions were grueling. Old wounds reopened, defenses shattered, and every painful memory was laid bare under the guidance of a professional who helped us navigate the storm. I discovered reserves of strength I hadn't known I possessed, and so did they. Each breakthrough brought us closer to understanding one another beyond the facades we had all worn for so long. As my story spread beyond our family, I realized that our struggles were far from unique. Countless others in my community and across the country grappled with similar toxic family dynamics hidden behind closed doors. My channel became a platform for sharing these truths, a safe space where stories of exclusion, judgment, and resilience could be told and heard. Messages poured in from strangers who saw themselves in my pain, who found courage in my refusal to stay silent, and who were inspired to confront their own family dysfunctions. Through this unexpected connection, I found purpose in a powerful voice I never thought I had. The community's reaction to my story was as complex as the family dynamics themselves. Supporters rallied around us, offering encouragement, resources, and a sense of solidarity. Others whispered in judgment, unwilling to accept that beneath the holiday cheer, some families were deeply fractured. The duality of these responses underscored a societal reluctance to confront uncomfortable realities, a tendency to mask pain with appearances rather than face it head-on. Yet, I was undeterred. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was a call to break the silence surrounding toxic family behaviors that hurt so many, a demand for change that went beyond any one household. The fallout was messy and painful, but necessary. Old wounds reopened and bled anew as we faced the consequences of years of neglect and judgment. Boundaries were tested and redrawn as I refused to accept my old role as the family scapegoat. It wasn't easy. Relationships strained under the weight of new expectations and raw honesty. Some family members resisted, clinging to old ways of thinking, unwilling to relinquish control or admit fault. But others embraced the challenge, willing to grow and heal alongside me. This journey forced us all to confront the uncomfortable truth that love alone isn't enough to sustain relationships. Respect, inclusion, and genuine communication are essential. Over time, the fragile threads of connection grew stronger. Our family gatherings, once strained and hollow, began to hold moments of laughter and understanding, fragile but real. We learned to listen without judgment, to apologize without defensiveness, and to cherish each other beyond superficial traditions. The process was far from perfect. Setbacks and arguments surfaced, reminding us how deep the scars ran. But each step forward was a victory, a testament to our willingness to change. Through it all, I held onto a powerful lesson. Standing up for yourself, even when it means standing alone, can ignite transformation, not just in your own life, but in those around you. That Christmas, what started as a desperate act of defiance became the catalyst for healing and growth. The lockout was no longer a symbol of exclusion, but a turning point where silence was broken and wounds began to mend. I came to understand that family is not defined solely by blood or tradition, but by the courage to face painful truths together and to choose love that is honest and inclusive. As the seasons changed, I felt a renewed hope that broken families like mine could find their way back from hurt and exclusion toward something stronger, kinder, and real. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges yet to come. But for the first time in years, I walked it with a sense of peace and purpose. This was more than a personal victory. It was a message for society. No one deserves to be invisible or silenced, and change is possible when we dare to confront the darkness within our closest bonds. I carried that message in my heart, ready to share it with the world, knowing that every act of courage, no matter how small, has the power to rewrite the stories we tell about family, love, and resilience. And now, with everything laid bare and the dust of that unforgettable holiday storm finally settled, I sit here speaking to you, not as the broken daughter, not as the exiled sister, not even as the girl who once trembled outside locked doors while muffled laughter echoed within, but as a woman who chose to rise above the betrayal, the judgment, the erasure, and I did so not by becoming bitter or cruel, but by becoming unshakably aware of my worth and by refusing, at last, to be silent in the face of manipulation dressed up as tradition. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? That's what exclusion so often is. Not just an accident, not just a miscommunication, but a quiet strategy of control, a way to erase someone without confrontation, to punish them for being inconvenient, too honest, too different, too unwilling to play the perfect role. I had been labeled difficult, dramatic, selfish, not because I had wronged them, but because I had dared to be something outside the narrative they had built. I had dared to change. I had dared to grow. And when growth doesn't fit the family mold, it becomes a threat. But I am not a threat. I am a survivor of their silence, a fighter forged in the fire of their rejection. And my message, the one I want, burned into the hearts of everyone who has ever been pushed out, misunderstood, made to feel small, for simply existing authentically, is this: exclusion is not a reflection of your value. It's a mirror to their fear. Fear of change, fear of being held accountable, fear of having to treat you like an equal when they've grown comfortable pretending you're beneath them. And in that space of clarity, I found something far more powerful than revenge. I found freedom, because locking the door that night wasn't about petty vengeance. It was about demonstrating, for the first time ever, that I could choose myself, that I didn't need their permission to belong, that the home I ached for could begin inside me, not in their decorated living room or on their picture-perfect trips I was never meant to join. The power of saying no, of drawing a line in the sand, of refusing to let someone else's version of you become your truth. It's liberating in a way that no apology can ever quite match. And yes, the world may try to guilt you for it. People will say, but they're family, as if that alone is a reason to keep accepting pain. But I ask, what is family truly, if not those who lift you up, who respect your voice, who choose inclusion over hierarchy, love over shame, truth over image? If family demands silence in exchange for acceptance, then that is not family. It's a cult of performance, and your spirit deserves better than that. I don't regret what I did. I don't regret the locked door, the confrontation, the very public fall of a private lie, because it forced them to look in the mirror. It forced them to feel, for just one night, what I had felt for years: alone, shut out, voiceless. And in that role reversal, there was no joy for me, only justice. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It became a reckoning, a necessary unraveling of false narratives. And now that the reckoning has passed, the air around me is lighter. I walk without guilt, without apology. I'm no longer the selfish one. I'm the one who finally said enough, the one who turned exclusion into evolution, the one who proved that sometimes the strongest love you'll ever give is the love you give yourself when no one else does. To those watching this, to anyone who's been quietly crying through holidays, hiding their pain behind polite smiles, pretending not to notice when the invitations stop coming, when the texts are cold, when your name becomes the one they say with a sigh, listen closely. You do not need their permission to reclaim your place in the world. You do not need to shrink to be loved. You do not need to suffer to be accepted. The world may try to tell you that forgiveness means returning to the same table that broke you, but forgiveness can also mean walking away with your head held high. It can mean building a new table, one where the seats are filled with people who see you, love you, and don't require you to bleed just to belong. My revenge wasn't about humiliation. It was about declaration, declaring that I would not be erased, declaring that love without respect is manipulation, declaring that family should never be a battleground where one person's difference becomes everyone else's target. I chose peace, and sometimes choosing peace looks like locking doors. Sometimes it looks like changing locks. Sometimes it looks like sitting in your own company, surrounded by the silence they used to weaponize, and realizing, finally, that the silence is now yours, and it's peaceful, and it's powerful, and it is no longer something they can use against you. I tell this story not because I want you to pity me or even praise me, but because I want you to remember this. You are allowed to outgrow people, even if they share your blood. You are allowed to demand better, even if it means standing alone for a while. You are allowed to walk away from holiday tables where your soul has been fed scraps and your voice drowned in laughter that never truly included you. And most of all, you are allowed to start again, because healing isn't about going back to how things were. It's about building something better, something stronger, something that aligns with the love you know you deserve. I built that love. I cultivated it. I stood in the storm and refused to sink. And now I speak so that others know they can do the same. Not everyone will understand your journey. Not everyone will clap when you rise. Some will call you dramatic. Others will say you're bitter. But those are just the echoes of the walls you broke through. Let them echo. You keep walking. You keep growing. You keep loving yourself fiercely. That is the best revenge. Not the door you locked, but the life you opened. A life without shame. A life without silence. A life where you are no longer the forgotten one, but the author of your own story. And I promise you this, there is nothing more powerful than a woman who chooses herself after being told she doesn't belong. So go ahead, lock that door, and then open 1,000 more.